Welcome to The Bitter Witness.
Don't be scared.
Hello, welcome back. I'm Rebecca, and I'm your host for The Bitter Witness. I hope you've had a good week. I've had a week. It has been so hot here in my little corner of Ontario. It feels as though Satan has dragged his balls across Canada. Listen, I'm a menopausal woman and I can't handle this shit. I went out to the garden to do some weeding last night and my neighbor was shocked to see me. She thought I'd died. I only like to come out in the fall and once in a while in the spring. Otherwise, I pretty much stay in the air conditioning. I hope you're dealing with the weather conditions wherever you may be. Let's see. What happened around here last week? I have a story to tell you, but there's a little bit of a backstory to it before I tell you what happened. At my community theater, where I spend most of my extra time because I have so much, there is a hard and fast rule. Rebecca is not allowed to have any tools of any kind in her hands ever. Period. End of sentence. I think this is a bit of an overreaction. I've only ever almost cut my finger off once or twice at the theater. Anyway, last week I noticed that my glass oil bottle that I keep on the counter was empty. It has one of those metal spouts on it so that you only get a little bit of oil when you pour. Anyways, I grabbed hold of the spout and tried to pull it out of the bottle. The bottle, of course, was quite slippery, as it was an oil bottle. And well, let's just say that my thumb didn't fare too well against the metal spout. I probably should have gone up for stitches, but who wants to sit in an emergency room for hours on end for 3 or 4 stitches? But now my thumb has a giant lump on it, and it's infected, and the giant slice has now sealed. So I guess it's off to the doctors for me, only to make sure I don't turn septic. Of course, I didn't stop gardening or dishwashing or playing with the dogs while it was healing, so of course it's infected. I guess oil bottles are now on the ever-growing list of things I'm not allowed to touch. That's about it for news from my home front. If you want to write in and tell me what's been happening in your corner of the world, or you have an idea for a future episode, or you just want to drop a line and say, hey, I'm listening, you can email me at thebitterwitness@gmail.com. And since we have seemed to have transitioned into the business portion of the podcast, might as well finish it off. If you enjoy the show, please head over to the Patreon page and become a supporter of the show. It's what allows me to keep bringing you these episodes. You can also support the show on Spotify as well, and if you're listening on Apple, please give the show a 5-star review. Apparently it helps the show in the algorithm, something I don't understand. Well, that's enough of the business. The dogs are sleeping behind me, so Puppy ASMR will be brought to you by both Miley and Piper today. So grab a cup of tea, sit back, and relax while I tell you about the case of Judias Buenoano. As always, I want to give the victims in this case top billing. James, Michael, John, Bobby, and all the other victims affected by this case. I acknowledge you and send my love to you wherever you may be. The matriarch of a family symbolizes female power and energy. They are the caregivers, the nurturers. They are able to navigate challenging situations within the family with grace and resilience, because they know they have to. Their family is depending on them to stay strong and resolute through the menagerie of issues that face families each and every day. But every now and then, a matriarch becomes warped in her sense of strength and power within the family unit. She starts to allow greed to darken her soul, and as a result of this, she will switch from nurturer and caregiver to murderess in the blink of an eye. In some cultures, a black widow spider is seen as a symbol of creativity, transformation, darkness, and death. Some believe the spider consumes their mate after the mate's purpose of fertilization has been fulfilled. Not unlike their namesake, a Black Widow woman is creative in the way she spins her web of lies and schemes. She has transformed from caregiver and nurturer to that of a cold-blooded killer, with the only motivation stemming from greed. And also like the spider, the woman consumes her mate when their purpose has been achieved. Today, we will be discussing the case of Judias Buenoano, by all definitions a Black Widow killer. She believed she was entitled to a lifestyle that was financially out of her grasp. By manipulating, deceiving, and killing those who loved, trusted, and depended on her was the only way she could attain what she coveted. I have heard some people pronounce her name as Judias or Judias, but I'm going to say Judias as it is the closest thing to Judas, which is a pretty good description of what this see you never twat that we are talking about today is. Strap in, friends, because this is a bumpy ride. Judias Buenoano was born Judias Anna Lou Welty on April 4th, 1943. She was the third of 4 children. She had 2 older siblings and a younger brother named Robert. When Judias was either 2 or 4 years old, I found it reported both ways, both in court papers and in articles. Her mother died of tuberculosis. Judias and Robert, her younger brother, were sent by their father to go and live with their grandparents. Eventually, her father remarried and sent for Judias and Robert to come and live with him again in New Mexico. According to Judias, upon her return to her father's home, both he and her new stepmother began abusing her, starving her, beating her, burning them with cigarettes, and forcing her to work as a slave for them. But this woman is a pathological liar and an all-around horrible shitfuck, so take that with a grain of salt. When Judias was 14 years old, she was arrested and convicted and sent to prison for 2 months for assaulting her parents and her 2 stepbrothers. In the court record, it states that she doused her 2 stepbrothers with hot grease and then flew at her stepmother and father, attacking them with hits, kicks, punches, and anything she could get her hands on inside the kitchen. Once Judias's time was completed in prison, she decided she did not want to go back and live with her father and stepmother, so she opted to be sent to a reform school to live. She graduated from the reform school in 1960 and became a nursing assistant. In 1961, she gave birth to her son Michael. Judias never revealed who the father of Michael was. And then, shortly after Michael was born, she met and married James Goodyear, who was a sergeant in the United States Marines. James and Judias married in 1962, and the couple had a son and a daughter together. As well, James adopted Michael in 1971. Around 1969, 70, 71, James was sent to Vietnam for a tour. Thankfully, he returned home to his family safe, but about 3 months after he returned, he started feeling sick. He was experiencing unyielding nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea. And after about 2 weeks of getting sicker and sicker, James was admitted to the Naval Hospital in Orlando. A Dr. Achenbach tried to stabilize James's condition, but sadly, on September 16, 1971, James Goodyear succumbed to his condition. In court, Dr. Achenbach stated that James suffered fluid overload and pulmonary congestion and died of cardiovascular collapse and renal failure, which basically means that James's kidney had failed and he had no way to get the toxins in his body out, and then his lungs filled with fluid and his heart gave out. Doctors felt that his death was the result of natural causes and signed off on burial without conducting an autopsy. We're going off on a tangent here, people. Strap in. I was wondering why they would have thought that James's death was natural causes. He was only 38 years old. And then I started wondering if it had something to do with Vietnam and Agent Orange. So let's Google Agent Orange and see if we can figure out when it was used and what some of the side effects are.
I am right behind you. Please stay.
Some of this that I found was from the aspeninstitute.org, and then some of it was from the Veterans Affairs website. I know nothing about Agent Orange. I just know it was a bad chemical. That's all I ever knew about it, but I'm glad I did this Googling, and you might be too. The more you know. Agent Orange was a herbicide mixture used by the U.S. military during the Vietnam War. Much of it contained a dangerous chemical contaminant called dioxin. Dioxin is a highly toxic organic pollutant linked to cancer, diabetes, birth defects, and other disabilities. The Red Cross estimates that 3 million Vietnamese have been affected by dioxin, including at least 150,000 children born with serious birth defects. Millions of Americans and Vietnamese are still affected directly and indirectly by the wartime U.S. spraying of Agent Orange. Well, that sounds lovely. Agent Orange was sprayed at up to 20 times the concentration that the manufacturers recommended for killing plants. It defoliated millions of acres of forest and farmland, large tracts of land that remain degraded and unproductive to this day. Dioxin can remain toxic in the soil for decades. Some soils at 3 of the former military bases in Vietnam, where Agent Orange was stored, still have extremely high concentrations of dioxin. Holy shit. This is crazy. After its use in the 1960s, Agent Orange was banned by the U.S. in 1971, and remaining stocks were taken from Vietnam and the U.S. to Johnson Atoll. The second word is Atoll. I'm not sure, I'm sorry. Atoll. Either way, it's a U.S.-controlled island about 700 miles southeast of Hawaii, where Agent Orange was destroyed in 1978. Oh, great. So you've poisoned Vietnam, and now you're going to go poison an island off of Hawaii. Great. Wonderful. Good thinking, U.S. government. According to the U.S. government, there is no Agent Orange in Vietnam or anywhere else today. So they say. But can we believe them? I mean, look who's running for president. Okay, I promise I won't go down that tangent. More than 45 million liters, or 12.1 million U.S. gallons, of Agent Orange were used from 1962 to 1971. Wow, that is a lot of toxins. Oh, and by the way, they didn't just have Agent Orange. The U.S. had something called the Rainbow Agents, and these agents included agents white, blue, purple, pink, and green. And of those other agents, the other colors, not Agent Orange, 28 million liters, or 7.4 million U.S. gallons, were sprayed on Vietnam during the Vietnam conflict. So not only do you have the 45 million liters of Agent Orange, but for good measure, we're going to add in another 28 million liters of other colored agents and dump all of them on Vietnam. That's insanity. Man, that just shows you the resilience of Vietnam. The fact that there's still people living there is shocking. All of these agents had different levels of dioxin in them, but they were all sprayed in concentrations that were well above the manufacturer's suggestion. Oh my God. That's ridiculous. The first spraying test occurred on August 10th, 1961. The U.S. Air Force Aerial Spraying Program, so they had an entire program, named Operation Hades, fitting, later renamed Operation Ranch Hand, are you kidding? Took place from January 1962 until February 1971, largely from C-123 cargo planes. Oh, so they just dropped it out of planes. That's great. The U.S. Chemical Corps and other Allied forces sprayed some of the agents from helicopters, trucks, and also by hand. Wow, they were just throwing it at them any which way they could. The herbicides, or agents, were sprayed over about 24% of southern Vietnam, destroying 5 million acres of upland and mangrove forests and about 500,000 acres of crops, a total area nearly the size of the state of Massachusetts. Of these areas, 34% were sprayed more than once. Some of the upland forests were sprayed more than 4 times. And one study found that 3,181 villages were sprayed also. Areas of Laos and Cambodia near the Vietnam border were also sprayed. Wow. The U.S. government stopped the spraying of all herbicides in October of 1971, but the South Vietnamese military continued spraying various chemicals until 1972. So they were spraying these to destroy any kind of forest that could provide coverage for the enemy during the Vietnam War, and also to poison the Vietnam people. Lovely. The lifespan of dioxin depends on its location. In human bodies, the lifespan is 11 to 15 years, though it can be as high as 20 years. What? In the environment, its lifespan varies depending on the type of soil and the depth of penetration. Sun will break down dioxin, so on leaf and soil surfaces, it will last 1 to 3 years depending on conditions. But dioxin that is buried or leached under the surface or deep in the sediment of rivers and other bodies of water can have a lifespan of more than 100 years. So it can still be alive in the water over in Vietnam. Oh my God. This is horrific. This is worse than any murder. I should just have done an episode on Agent Orange and the rainbow agents. Jesus. Now, this is a list from the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs that states what they acknowledge are the possible side effects of exposure to Agent Orange and the other rainbow agents. Strap in. Amyloidosis, bladder cancer, leukemia, chloracne, which is a rare skin condition where there is an eruption of nodules, blackheads, and acne on the skin. Diabetes type 2, hypertension, which is high blood pressure, Hodgkin's disease, hypothyroidism, ischemic heart disease, which is the reduction of blood to the heart, monoclonal gammopathy of undetermined significance, which is significant change in cells that may become cancer, cancer of the bone marrow, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, Parkinsonism, which means any condition where the person has abnormal movements, slow movements, trouble speaking, tremors, etc. Full-blown Parkinson's disease, early onset neuropathy, which is a nervous system condition that causes numbness, tingling, and motor weakness. Porphyria cutanea tarda, which is a dysfunction of the liver and includes blistering and thinning of the skin when exposed to sunlight. Prostate cancer, lung, larynx, trachea, and bronchial cancers. Muscle, fat, blood, lymph vessels, and connective tissue cancers. Birth defects in children, which mainly include spina bifida, severe cleft palates, Poland syndrome, which is when the child is born missing muscles from one side of their body, Williams syndrome, which is a genetic defect whereby the child has heart defects, cognitive delays, a broad forehead, wide-set eyes. These children are often said to have elfin-like features of their face. Then, at the very bottom of this list of horrific diseases, the government says that they also will include someone who develops ALS, but only if they had more than 90 days of service over in Vietnam, because they, meaning the U.S. government, don't believe that ALS is directly related to Agent Orange exposure. Right. I'm sure it's not at all in any way, shape, or form. Then, at the very bottom of this Veterans Affairs page, they have a paragraph entitled, Live Healthy. And this is what it says. It says, there are steps veterans can take to help prevent heart disease, cancer, and other common diseases of aging. Get the recommended health screenings, eat a healthy diet, exercise regularly, and don't smoke. Oh, they forgot one. Don't be exposed to any of the rainbow agents and don't trust your government? What the hell? Jesus. That was just a quick lesson in chemical warfare. Sweet Christ, that is terrifying. And the U.S. just exposed their soldiers to this. I have got to do an episode on the Vietnam War. I have to do it. So no wonder they put James's death down as natural causes. He most likely flew one of the planes that dropped the Agent Orange. Remember, this all happened in the 80s, and the U.S. government didn't publicly acknowledge that Agent Orange had any harmful effects on humans until the Agent Orange Act was passed in 1991. So knowing that he was a pilot during the Vietnam War and have had active duty over there, you know they knew before 1991 that Agent Orange was doing all this shit. So they just put it down as natural causes and buried him. Wow. All right. End of tangent. Back to the story. A friend of James and Judias's, named Deborah Sims, testified at the trial that she witnessed James hallucinating while sick about rabbits on his bed. She said that his illness seemed to increase slowly and that Judias was always hesitant to take James to the hospital whenever Deborah suggested it. Two other friends of Judias's, Constance Lang and Mary Beverly Owens, testified in court that on several occasions, Judias would discuss how easy it would be to kill someone simply by adding a few drops of arsenic to their food. These two witnesses also testified that after James's death, Judias had admitted killing James to them. Constance told the court that on several occasions, Judias had joked with her about lacing her husband's food with poison. Okay, I know that many wives with dark senses of humor joke about murdering their significant other, or many partners joke about it. If you keep bringing the subject up over and over again, as it sounds that Judias did, and discussing how to slip arsenic into their food, I'm telling the cops. Just saying. After James died, Judias collected approximately $33,000 in life insurance payouts and $62,000 in payouts from the Veterans Affairs Department. That's $95,000, people. 2 years after James died, Judias started dating a man named Bobby Joe Morris. Judias moved to Colorado to live with Bobby Joe, and in 1977, Bobby Joe began feeling ill. He started exhibiting the same symptoms that James had had before he died. Hallucinations, vomiting, diarrhea, nausea. In January of 1978, Bobby Joe died in the exact same excruciating way that James had died. After Bobby Joe died, Judias changed her name legally to Judias Buenoano, which is a name she created using the Spanish words for good and year, which, remember, Goodyear was James's last name. She then collected $23,000 in life insurance payouts for Bobby Joe's death. In 1979, Judias's son Michael decided to join the Army. While in the Army, he started having some issues with his arms and legs. He was hospitalized, and the doctors found that he was suffering from acute arsenic poisoning, which in turn had partially paralyzed his arms and legs. Gee, I wonder where that arsenic is coming from. Judias. The Army doctors fitted Michael with metal braces for his legs. Remember, this was 1979, so the metal was most likely extremely heavy. Once Michael had recovered enough to become mobile, on May 12, 1980, the Army released him to the care of Judias, his mother. The very next day, on May 13, 1980, after being just discharged, Judias took Michael and his younger brother James canoeing on the East River. Really? Really? Canoeing. Who the fuck wants to go canoeing when you just get discharged from the hospital and you've got brand new giant metal braces on your legs? That's ridiculous. While the three were out in the river canoeing, the canoe capsized. Judias and James were able to get out from under the overturned canoe, but Michael, weighted down by the metal braces on his legs, drowned. This woman is an absolute shit pig. Judias collected $20,000 from Michael's military life insurance. My God. I'm sure Michael was pretty weak, seeing as how he had just gotten released from the hospital and probably couldn't fight being put in a canoe. Or he thought that his mother was trying to be nice and help him relax after going through such a traumatic experience as being paralyzed. You know what? I want to amend what I said about Judias earlier. This monster is not a shit pig. She is a shit snake. She makes men, any man, think that she loves them, and then she just destroys them and sucks the life from them. After Michael's murder, Judias opened a beauty salon in Gulf Breeze, Florida, with the money she received from his life insurance. There, she met a man named John Gentry. The two began dating and eventually moved in together. During this time, Judias convinced John that they should have life insurance policies on each other, and John agreed. John testified at trial that Judias had told him that one of the reasons for the push for the life insurance policies was because of the horrible, unbelievable luck she had had with her previous partners. Judias had told John that James Goodyear had been killed in a plane crash in Vietnam and that Bobby Joe had died from alcoholism. What a bitch. A short time after the insurance policies were purchased, in 1982, John came down with a cold. Judias, being the ever-loving wife, started giving him vitamin C caplets to help fight the cold. But John started getting sicker. He started suffering from nausea, diarrhea, convulsions. Sound familiar? John checked himself into the hospital on December 15th, 1982, and he immediately started getting better because he had stopped taking the vitamin C caplets that Judias was throwing down his throat. But even though that happened, he never suspected that Judias was poisoning him. But why would he? Who would think that? You would never think that your spouse is intentionally poisoning you. And you would also probably think, well, I'm in the hospital. The doctors must be doing something to make me better, and it's working. But then, when John returned home on December 28th, 1982, and was feeling better, Judias gave him the vitamin C caplets again, and he immediately became sick. Judias then stated that John should take a double dose of the vitamin C caplets to fight off the sickness and started pushing vitamin C tablets on him again. According to court documents, John stopped taking the vitamin C caplets and saved them and took them to the police to be tested. And the result was that they contained both arsenic and paraformaldehyde. Paraformaldehyde is used as a fungicide and a wood preservative. Needless to say, according to the reports I found, they broke up. It gets pretty muddy in here about the breakup, about when the breakup happened and when John got the results of the lab tests on the caplets. There was even a timeline in one of the court documents that I read, but it didn't address this. Some of the reports that I read stated that John took the caplets to the police to be tested and the two stayed together. Others said that he broke up with her. So I can't tell you for certain what happened in that little foggy gray area. But according to the court documents, on June 25th, 1983, Judias convinced John to join her and some of her friends for dinner at a restaurant. Judias suggested that John park his car a little further from the restaurant. And after dinner, John left the restaurant alone, and when he switched on the headlights of his car, it fucking exploded. I've heard a different report about what happened that night. In one of the articles I read, it stated that Judias announced that she was pregnant with John's child, and John decided to go out and celebrate and buy champagne, and when he started his car, it exploded. But I put my faith more in the court documents. I've read about the dinner date in almost every court document. So that's what I believe. You can believe what you want, but either way, his fucking car exploded. During John's recovery from the explosion, thank God he lived, the police began investigating Judias. They discovered that in the few weeks prior to the explosion, Judias had been telling several friends and acquaintances that John had developed a terminal illness and was slowly passing away. Then they discovered that Judias' background seemed a little wonky, for lack of a better term. So they started looking into all the deaths that had occurred throughout Judias' life. They obtained an exhumation order for James Goodyear's body, and during the autopsy, it was discovered that the levels of arsenic found in James's kidneys, liver, hair, and nails showed that he had died of chronic arsenic exposure. After that information was discovered, the police exhumed Bobby Joe's body. That autopsy showed that Bobby Joe also died of arsenic poisoning, but this time it was an acute arsenic poisoning, meaning that Bobby Joe was either given one huge dose of arsenic or several smaller doses in a very short amount of time. Either way, his death must have been excruciating. Then law enforcement exhumed her son Michael's body. That autopsy concluded that Michael, as well, had been ingesting arsenic in small doses over an extended period of time. And in court, the medical examiner stated that Michael's paralysis was definitely caused by the arsenic exposure. My guess is that Judias felt that the arsenic was taking too long to kill her son, so she opted for a canoeing accident to speed the process of collecting his military life insurance. This woman is not just a shit snake, but a slimy shit snake. How could she look him in the eye after knowing that she had paralyzed him with arsenic? Monster. Just a downright fucking monster she was. Law enforcement then executed a search warrant for Judias's home, and there they found wire and bomb-making materials that matched those found in the wreckage of John's car. She figured out how to make a car bomb. Jesus. The police arrested Judias in 1983 and charged her with the murders of her son Michael and James Goodyear, as well as the attempted murder of John Gentry. She was convicted on all charges, and for Michael's murder, she received a life sentence. For John's attempted murder, she received 12 years, and for James's death, she was sentenced to death by electrocution. Judias never admitted to anything and maintained her innocence until the very end. When being sentenced in court, the judge was unable to find any mitigating factors that would keep the court from giving her a death sentence. Judias, of course, tried to appeal her sentence, and all of her appeals were dismissed, and her execution was set for January 25th, 1990. Now, I don't want to get too far into the boring details of all her appeals, but there was something very interesting in one of her appeals that I want to share with you. In one of the appeals, Judias's lawyer was arguing that her death sentence should be commuted to a life term because Old Sparky, which is what the prisoners in Florida called the electric chair there, was, according to her lawyer and Judias, faulty, and that if she were to be electrocuted, it would be cruel and unusual punishment. In the appeal, they stated an example of a criminal who was executed in the electric chair named Jesse Tefero. When they first flicked the switch to execute Tefero, smoke started coming out from under the metal cap that they wear when they're electrocuted. Prison officials stopped the flow of electricity, but then they started the electricity again, and at this point, his head caught on fire. Fire! There were flames coming off of his head while he was being executed. Prison officials stated that some of the flames coming from Tefero's head reached 12 inches high. That's a foot. That's a foot above his head. Oh my God. After the flames were doused, they sent a third jolt of electricity through to the chair, and Tefero was pronounced dead. How much horrible luck do you have to actually catch on fire while being electrocuted and then have to be electrocuted 3 times to be killed in the death chamber? This was in her appeal, saying that if you put me in this old Sparky, this same thing is going to happen, and you can't do that knowing that it's faulty. The court's response to Judias in this appeal was that they had already looked into the electric chair malfunction with Tefero, and everything was just fine with old Sparky, and you're good to go to be electrocuted. Finally, after many, many more appeals and arguments and a last-ditch effort for a stay, on March 30th, 1998, at 7:02 a.m., Judias Buenoano was brought to the execution chamber by 2 guards. Each guard had a hold of her arms and were holding her upright as they walked her up to old Sparky and strapped her in. She was asked if she had any last words. "No, sir," was her only response. With that, she squeezed her eyes shut and kept them shut. At 7:08 a.m., the power was turned on. Throughout the 38-second electrocution, smoke curled up from her right leg, and at 7:13 a.m., she was officially pronounced dead. And with that, Judias Buenoano paid for all the manipulation, pain, and misery she caused while she was free on this earth. My thoughts. I am not a huge proponent of the death penalty. I believe that it should be determined on a case-by-case basis and only carried out when there is 100% certainty of the guilt of the person. And the crime has to be exceptionally heinous to warrant a death sentence. However, in Judias Welty/Goodyear/Morris/Buenoano's case, do I feel that she is guilty? 100%. And do I think she was deserving of the death penalty? Abso-fucking-lutely. For years, she was able to commit these murders without suspicion because the crimes themselves violate society's basic assumptions of love. Love between partners, love between a mother and a child. Our society believes that women are caregivers, and when a shit snake like Judias Buenoano slithers into the fold, we question ourselves when we begin to suspect that she may be doing something against our societal norms. I feel as though a so-called Black Widow killer such as Judias is potentially one of the most lethal killers that we have identified. She was in the most predominant place of trust within her families, and she betrayed that trust and scoffed off the love that was given to her by those closest to her, by those who looked to her for protection, guidance, and care. These types of killers are given the moniker of Black Widow because of the spider. The female Black Widow weaves a messy yet extremely strong web to lure her victims, not unlike the killers such as Judias. Contrary to popular belief, in the wild, a female Black Widow spider will not eat her male once he has served his purpose. In fact, the male Black Widow spider will do almost anything he can to escape her. Judias tangled a messy web of manipulation, deceit, and betrayal, all purely motivated by greed. She smiled sweetly as she slowly and painfully murdered her family, and at the end, she was left barren and alone. All facts considered, I think her lonely, painful death was quite apropos. Well, that was a horrible case. It just made my stomach churn thinking of all the manipulation and betrayal that this shit snake dispersed on her family. If you enjoyed this episode, please go over to the Patreon page and support us. You can also leave us a 5-star review on Apple. It really does help the show. I think we'll leave it there for this week. Stay safe and enjoy your day today. This has been a Bitter Witness production.